Part 1. The Land of the Yellow River, Cradle of Chinese Civilization. In the far east of the world, where mountains kiss the clouds and rivers carve wide valleys, lies the heart of China. The Yellow River, known as the River of Sorrows, carried both life and destruction. Each year its waters spilled over the plains, leaving fertile soil that nourished crops, yet also sweeping away entire villages when floods raged. Here humanity learned to settle, to farm millet and rice, to tame animals, to raise villages of earth and timber. Over thousands of years, clans grew into tribes, and tribes into kingdoms. From these valleys emerged not just a people, but a civilization destined to endure for millennia. Part 2. The Mythic Age, Dragons, Ancestors, and the Mandate of Heaven. Before kings, there were legends. The Chinese told of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, culture heroes who taught humanity the arts of fire, farming, writing, and medicine. Among them was the Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, said to have invented the compass, the cart, and even the very idea of rule itself. The dragon became the symbol of China, not a beast of terror, but of wisdom, power, and cosmic balance. It wound through the skies and rivers, its coils representing the unity of heaven and earth. From these myths arose the concept of the Mandate of Heaven, that rulers governed not by birthright alone, but by harmony with heaven's will. If they ruled with virtue, heaven blessed their reign. If they grew corrupt, heaven sent floods, droughts, and rebellion. This belief would shape the destiny of every dynasty to come. Part 3. The Xia and Shang dynasties, Bronze, Oracles, and Ancestors. The earliest dynasties live in the twilight between myth and history. The Xia dynasty, said to have been founded by Yu the Great, was remembered for taming the floods and teaching irrigation. Though few records survive, Yu became a symbol of the ruler who serves his people by controlling nature itself. More clearly, we know the Shang dynasty. Their kings ruled from walled cities, surrounded by bronze workshops and ancestral temples. Shang artisans cast ritual vessels of stunning complexity, their surfaces alive with spirals and animal forms. The Shang also spoke to the spirits. On oracle bones, the shoulder blades of oxen, and the shells of turtles, they inscribed questions to the ancestors. Will the harvest succeed? Should we go to war? When cracked in fire, the bones gave answers, and the king acted according to the will of his forefathers. The Shang believed the living and the dead were never far apart, bound together in an unbroken chain of reverence and duty. Part 4. The Zhou dynasty, Mandates of Heaven and Feudal Lords. Around 1046 BCE, the Shang fell to the Zhou, who claimed they had won heaven's favor. They introduced the enduring idea of the Mandate of Heaven, that just rule is granted by the divine order itself. If kings became corrupt, heaven withdrew its blessing and others rose in their place. The Zhou organized their realm through feudal lords, granting land in exchange for loyalty and service. Over time, their domain expanded, and Chinese culture deepened. Rites, music, and the calendar all flourished. Yet the unity of the Zhou was fragile. As centuries passed, lords grew independent, kings weakened, and the realm fractured. But from this time of division would come ideas and philosophies that shaped the very soul of China. Part 5. The 100 Schools of Thought. In the age of turmoil, wisdom blossomed. Scholars and sages sought answers to restore order. From their debates emerged the 100 Schools of Thought. Confucius, wandering teacher, taught of harmony through duty, respect, and virtue. Filial piety, he said, bound family and state alike.
A ruler must be just, a son must honor his father, and society would flourish through ritual and righteousness. Lao Tzu, the old master, looked not to rules, but to the flow of nature. He taught the Tao, the way, an eternal balance found in water, wind, and silence. To follow the Tao was to live in harmony with the universe. Others arose, Mozi, preaching universal love, legalists, calling for strict laws and punishment, and countless more. Their debates echoed across the courts of kings and the hearts of common folk, weaving a tapestry of wisdom that endures even now. Part 6. The Warring States, Endless Battles and Qin's Rise. As Zhou power crumbled, the land splintered into rival kingdoms. This was the age of the Warring States. 7 great states, Qin, Chu, Chai, Yan, Han, Zhao, and Wei, battled without rest. It was a time of strategy and cunning. Generals studied the art of war by Sun Tzu, mastering deception, discipline, and speed. Diplomats wove alliances, spies whispered in courts, and armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands clashed upon the fields. The suffering of the people was immense, yet from this crucible of chaos came transformation. The state of Qin, hardened by harsh laws and strict discipline, grew stronger than the rest. Guided by ruthless ministers and ambitious kings, Qin prepared to end the wars once and for all, and forge the first empire of China.
Part 7. The Qin Dynasty, the First Emperor and the Great Wall. In 221 BCE, the wars ended. The king of Qin, Ying Sheng, declared himself Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor. For the first time, all of China was united under one ruler. He was ambitious, tireless, and ruthless. He abolished feudal lords, standardized weights, measures, coins, even the width of cart axles so that all roads carried the same wheels. He ordered books burned if they opposed his vision, and scholars punished if they resisted. Most of all, he built. Across the northern frontier, he linked walls into the first form of the Great Wall, a barrier against nomadic raiders. He commanded roads, canals, and palaces. And for himself, he built a tomb unlike any other, guarded by an army of terracotta warriors, each with a unique face, standing eternal vigil in silence. Yet the first emperor could not escape death. He sought elixirs of immortality, but in vain. When he died, his empire crumbled quickly, but his legacy, the idea of one China, endured. Part 8. The Han Dynasty, Silk Roads and the Golden Age. From the ashes of Qin, the Han Dynasty rose. For 4 centuries, it guided China into a golden age. The Han expanded their borders, sending armies into Central Asia, Korea, and Vietnam. They opened the Silk Road, a web of trade that carried silk, jade, and porcelain westward, and brought back glass, horses, and ideas. At home, the Han nurtured learning. Scholars studied the Confucian classics, and civil service exams began to test officials by knowledge, not birth. Paper was invented, astronomy flourished, and medicine advanced. The Han emperors ruled with majesty, yet they also understood the balance between power and virtue. Under their reign, China became not only a land, but a civilization admired far beyond its borders. Part 9. The Age of Buddhism, Faith along the Silk Road. From India, a new faith traveled the Silk Road, Buddhism. Traders, monks, and pilgrims carried its teachings across deserts and mountains until they reached the heart of China. In caves at Dunhuang, artists painted vast murals of the Buddha, glowing in torchlight. Temples rose filled with statues of serene faces and golden robes. The Chinese blended Buddhism with Taoism and Confucianism, shaping it into their own. For centuries, caravans of camels passed along the Silk Road, carrying not only goods but ideas, linking China to worlds beyond. Part 10. The Tang Dynasty. Poetry, Cosmopolitan Splendor, and Chang'an. The Tang Dynasty shone as one of China's brightest ages. Its capital, Chang'an, was the largest city on earth, filled with markets selling silks, spices, perfumes, and jewels. Envoys from Persia, India, and Arabia walked its streets. The Tang were lovers of art. Poets like Li Bai and Du Fu wrote verses that still echo, of moonlit nights, wandering rivers, the sorrow of war, the beauty of nature. Painters captured misty mountains and endless skies. Buddhism reached its height, monks translating sutras and building towering pagodas. Yet the Tang also knew strife, rebellions, invasions, and intrigue. Still, the dynasty's glory lives on as an age of elegance, culture, and global exchange. Part 11. The Sung Dynasty. Inventions, Trade, and Landscapes of Art. After the Tang came the Sung Dynasty, a time of brilliance in science and art. The Chinese invented gunpowder, the magnetic compass, and printing with movable type, changing the world forever. Markets thrived, cities grew, and merchants grew wealthy. Sung painters created landscapes of breathtaking beauty, mountains rising in mist, rivers flowing into the distance, tiny figures walking paths that seemed endless. It was an age of refinement, though the Sung faced threats from nomadic neighbors. Still, their achievements in art, philosophy, and technology set foundations for centuries to come. Part 12. The Mongols and the Yuan Dynasty. Kublai Khan's Empire. From the northern steppes came the Mongols. In the 13th century, Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, conquered China and founded the Yuan Dynasty. For the first time, China was ruled by foreigners. Yet Kublai made Beijing his capital, built palaces, and welcomed travelers from afar. Among them was Marco Polo, whose tales of China amazed Europe. The Yuan Dynasty blended East and West, linking China into the vast Mongol Empire that stretched across Eurasia. But its rule was heavy, and rebellion stirred among the Chinese people. Part 13. The Ming Dynasty. Voyages of Zheng He and the Forbidden City. From rebellion rose the Ming Dynasty, proud and powerful. They rebuilt the Great Wall, stronger than ever, and raised the Forbidden City in Beijing, a palace of red walls, golden roofs, and endless halls. The Ming emperors sent ships across the seas. Admiral Zheng He commanded vast fleets, sailing to India, Arabia, and Africa. His ships carried gifts of silk and porcelain and returned with wonders from distant lands. At home, the Ming fostered art, porcelain shining with blue and white patterns, and literature that gave birth to classic novels still read today. But even the strongest dynasties faltered. Floods, famine, and corruption plagued the Ming. Peasants rose in rebellion, armies faltered, and foreign powers pressed at the borders. The mandate of heaven, once granted, now slipped away. Just as the Shang fell to the Zhou, just as Qin gave way to Han, so too the Ming weakened, making way for the dynasties that would follow. Part 15. The Eternal Legacy of China. Philosophy, Silk, and the Dragon. Through 4,000 years, dynasties rose and fell, but the spirit of China endured. From the wisdom of Confucius and the balance of the Tao, from the silk that traveled the world to the dragon that still symbolizes power and harmony, China shaped not only its own destiny, but that of the world. Its walls still stand, its poems still sing, its inventions still shape our lives. The story of China is not only of emperors and battles, but of farmers, poets, monks, and artisans, a civilization vast as
Part
the
1.
rivers, enduring
land
as the
of
mountains. eternal
mountains,
as the
seas,
dragon in
and
the
early
sky.
settlements. Greece, or Hellas as its people called it, was a land of mountains and islands. Jagged peaks divided valleys into small pockets where villages clung to the soil and grew into independent city-states. The Aegean Sea stretched like a silver mirror, dotted with islands, inviting sailors to journey outward. Here, geography shaped destiny. The Greeks were never one people under one king, but many, bound by language, gods, and stories. Farmers tended olives and vines on rocky hillsides. Shepherds led flocks through narrow passes, and fishermen cast nets into the deep. From their harbors, Greeks sailed to Egypt, Anatolia, and beyond, carrying wine, pottery, and ideas. It was a land both harsh and beautiful, a place that demanded resilience and inspired imagination. Part 2. The Age of Myths, Zeus, Hera, and the Olympian Gods. Before history, the Greeks told stories. They spoke of Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky. They told how the Titans rose and how Cronus devoured his children, only to be overthrown by his son Zeus. Upon Mount Olympus, the gods reigned. Zeus, king of thunder, Hera, his queen, Athena, born from his head in armor, Apollo, radiant with the light of prophecy and music, Artemis, huntress of the wild, Poseidon, lord of the sea, Hades, ruler of the underworld. The gods were not distant. They quarreled, loved, deceived, and punished, reflecting the passions of men. In every storm, every harvest, every victory, the Greeks saw their will. To honor them, they built temples, offered sacrifices, and held festivals of music, games, and ritual. Myth was not just story, it was truth woven into daily life. Part 3. Heroes and Epics, Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey. From these myths came heroes larger than life, yet deeply human. Their tales were sung by bards and at last written by Homer, whose epics shaped Greece forever. The Iliad told of the Trojan War, of Achilles, swift and wrathful, of Hector, noble defender, of Helen, whose beauty launched 1,000 ships. It spoke of fate and rage, of gods meddling in the affairs of men. The Odyssey told of Odysseus, who wandered for years across strange seas, facing Cyclops, sirens, and enchantresses before returning home to Ithaca. His journey was not only across waters, but through the trials of the human soul. These epics were not just entertainment. They were guides to virtue and folly, courage and pride, the lessons of men and gods sung beneath the stars. Part 4. The Age of Heroes, Heracles, Perseus, and Theseus. Beyond Homer's epics, countless heroes lived in Greek memory. There was Heracles, son of Zeus, who bore the labors of strength, slaying the Nemean lion, capturing the golden hind, cleaning the Augean stables, and many more. His trials symbolized endurance against impossible odds. There was Perseus, who cut off the head of Medusa, the Gorgon with serpents for hair, whose gaze turned men to stone. There was Theseus, who entered the labyrinth of Crete, facing the Minotaur, half man, half bull, and slew it, guided by the thread of Ariadne. These heroes were not flawless. They erred, they suffered. But in them the Greeks saw courage, cunning, and destiny. Their stories lived in temples, in plays, in whispered prayers of those who sought strength. Part 5. The Rise of the Polis, Athens and Sparta, and the Greek way of life. As centuries passed, Greece left behind the age of myths and entered the age of cities. The polis, the city-state, became the heart of Greek life. In Athens, democracy was born. Citizens gathered in assembly to vote, to debate, to decide laws together. They celebrated theater, philosophy, and the arts, building a society that valued speech as much as spear. In Sparta, a different way of life prevailed. Boys were trained as warriors from youth, living in barracks, bound by discipline and strength. Their women held unusual freedom, managing estates and speaking boldly, while their men fought for the state above all else. Other cities flourished too, Corinth with trade, Thebes with warriors, but Athens and Sparta shone brightest, two stars guiding Greece in different directions. The Greeks were rivals, but also kin. They met in festivals, like the Olympic Games, held every 4 years in honor of Zeus, where athletes ran, wrestled, and competed beneath the gaze of the gods. Part 6. War with Persia, Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis. Beyond their mountains and seas lay empires vast and powerful, none greater than Persia. In the 5th century BCE, Persia sought to subdue the small cities of Greece, but the Greeks resisted. At Marathon, outnumbered, Athenians charged the Persians and won a stunning victory. A messenger ran back to Athens to deliver the news, the origin of the Marathon race. Years later, at Thermopylae, King Leonidas of Sparta stood with 300 warriors against a host beyond counting. Though they fell, their defiance inspired Greece. At sea, the Athenians triumphed at Salamis, luring the Persian fleet into narrow straits and crushing them. United, the Greeks turned back the might of an empire, proving that courage and cunning could overcome vast power. These wars shaped Greek identity, free cities standing against tyranny, united by gods, heroes, and the love of their land.
Part 7. Athens and the Golden Age, Pericles, Drama, and Philosophy. After the Persian Wars, Athens entered its greatest age. Under the statesman Pericles, democracy flourished, and the city adorned itself with temples and theaters. Upon the Acropolis, the Parthenon rose, its marble columns gleaming in the sun, a tribute to Athena, goddess of wisdom. Athenians loved the arts. Playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides filled theaters with tragedies and dramas that asked timeless questions of fate and justice. Aristophanes, with sharp comedy, mocked generals and politicians alike. Philosophers walked the streets, debating truth, virtue, and the soul. Sculptors carved statues of divine beauty, while citizens gathered to listen, to argue, to vote. Athens became the shining jewel of Greece, a beacon of culture and ideas, though its brilliance would also sow envy and strife. Part 8. Sparta and the Peloponnesian War. Sparta, proud and wary, looked upon Athens' growing power with suspicion. So began the Peloponnesian War, a struggle that pitted Greek against Greek. For nearly 30 decades, Athens and Sparta fought, at sea, on land, in sieges and shifting alliances. Athens' navy ruled the waves, while Spartans' warriors dominated the fields. The war drained resources, shattered unity, and brought plague and famine. At last, with the help of Persia, Sparta triumphed. Athens surrendered, its walls torn down, its empire lost. Yet Sparta, too, soon weakened, and Greece lay divided, vulnerable to new powers rising beyond its borders.
Part 9. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Wisdom of the Greeks. Even in times of war, Greek thought soared. In Athens, the philosopher Socrates wandered the streets, questioning merchants and generals, asking, "What is justice? What is virtue?" His method of relentless inquiry unsettled many, and at last he was condemned, drinking poison in defense of truth. His student Plato founded the Academy, envisioning a republic guided by wisdom and the ideal of forms. Aristotle, in turn, studied all things, logic, biology, ethics, politics, and taught a young Macedonian prince who would one day change the world. These thinkers left Greece not only with monuments of stone, but monuments of the mind, ideas that still shape our world. Part 10. The Rise of Macedonia. Philip II unites the Greeks. In the north, a new power gathered strength, Macedonia. Once dismissed as rustic and crude, under Philip II it forged a formidable army. With long spears called sarissas, disciplined ranks, and clever strategy, Philip crushed the divided Greek states. At the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE, Athens and Thebes fell before him. For the first time, Greece stood united, though not by choice, under Macedonian rule. Philip dreamed of leading the Greeks against Persia, but before his vision could unfold, he was struck down by an assassin. His son would inherit his dream. Part 11. Alexander the Great. Conquests to the Edge of the World. That son was Alexander, who became king at 20. Taught by Aristotle, trained in war from youth, Alexander was bold, brilliant, and relentless. He crossed into Asia, leading Greeks against Persia. At Granicus, Issus, and Gaugamela, he shattered the Persian armies and pursued Darius III across his empire. From Asia Minor to Egypt, from Babylon to the mountains of India, Alexander marched, his soldiers following him into lands unknown. He founded cities named Alexandria, spreading Greek culture across the world. Yet he also honored local traditions, wearing Persian robes, adopting Eastern customs, and blending cultures. But at 32, in Babylon, Alexander fell ill and died. His empire, vast as the horizon, fractured among his generals. Yet his legend never faded, the boy who became a god in the eyes of many. Part 12. The Legacy of Greece. Philosophy, Democracy, and Myth Eternal. Though empires passed, Greece left behind treasures greater than conquest. Democracy, born in Athens, became an ideal for ages to come. Philosophy, from Socrates to Aristotle, laid the foundations of reason and science. The myths of Zeus, Athena, and Achilles still speak to the human heart. Greek art, drama, and architecture inspired Rome, the Renaissance, and the modern world. Their stories, carved in marble and sung in verse, remain eternal. Greece was not one empire, but a spirit of inquiry, of freedom, of beauty. From myths of gods to the conquests of Alexander, from the theaters of Athens to the wisdom of philosophers, Greece gave the world a legacy that endures forever.
Part 1. From the Franks to the Crusades. Chapter 1. The Franks and the Birth of France. As the Western Roman Empire crumbled in the 5th century, new tribes filled the vacuum of power. Among them were the Franks, a Germanic people who settled in Gaul. Their leader, Clovis I, rose to unite them. In 496, after victory in battle, he was baptized into Christianity, becoming the first Catholic king of the Franks. With him, a bond was forged between kingship and the church that would shape France for centuries. Under Clovis and his descendants, the Merovingian dynasty ruled. Their kings wore long hair as a sign of power, but over time, real authority slipped into the hands of their nobles and palace mayors. Yet the name of the Franks gave birth to France, and their kingdom laid its first foundations. Chapter 2. Charlemagne and the Carolingian Empire. In the 8th century, a new dynasty rose, the Carolingians. Its greatest ruler was Charlemagne, or Charles the Great. He expanded the Frankish realm into an empire stretching from Spain to Germany, from the North Sea to Italy. On Christmas Day, in the year 800, in the Basilica of St. Peter's in Rome, Pope Leo III placed a crown upon his head, declaring him Emperor of the Romans. The legacy of Rome lived again in the West. Charlemagne was not only a conqueror, but a reformer. He established schools, reformed laws, and promoted learning in what came to be called the Carolingian Renaissance. Scholars copied ancient texts, monks illuminated manuscripts, and Latin was preserved. His empire did not survive long after his death in 814, but his memory endured. To the French, he was both king and father of their nation, the shining figure at the dawn of their story. Chapter 4. Feudal France and the Age of Castles. With Charlemagne's empire divided, France entered a new age, the age of feudalism. Kings were weak, and local lords ruled their lands like little monarchs. Castles of stone rose on every hill, symbols of power and defense. Knights swore loyalty to their lords, bound by oaths of fealty. Peasants worked the fields, paying rents in labor and crops. Monasteries grew in importance, centers of prayer, learning, and refuge. It was a world of division and loyalty, of swords and towers. Though often violent, it forged the medieval order, where power was local and every village lived in the shadow of a castle or a monastery. Chapter 5. The Capetian Kings and the Growth of Paris. In 987, a nobleman named Hugh Capet was elected king. His crown was small, his realm weak, but he founded a dynasty, the Capetians, that would rule France for centuries. At first, the Capetian kings controlled little more than Paris and its surrounding lands, yet Paris itself began to grow. It became a center of trade along the Seine, and its cathedral, Notre Dame, rose as a symbol of faith and pride. Generation by generation, the Capetians slowly expanded their authority. By patience, marriage, and war, they bound the great lords of France to their throne. The seeds of a true kingdom were being sown. Chapter 5. The Crusades and the French Knights. In the late 11th century, a call went out from Rome. The First Crusade. Across Europe, knights gathered to march to the Holy Land. Among them, the French were the most numerous and the most renowned. They marched beneath the cross, their banners flying. They captured Jerusalem in 1099 and founded Crusader states in the east. French knights became lords of castles in Syria and Palestine, blending east and west. Back home, the crusading spirit shaped France. Orders like the Knights Templar were born, their headquarters in Paris, their power stretching across Europe.
Songs of crusaders and pilgrims filled the air, binding faith and war in the French imagination. The age of the Crusades made France the beating heart of Christendom, a land of knights, kings, and dreams of holy conquest.
Part 2. From the 100 Years' War to the Sun King. Chapter 6. The 100 Years' War. In the 14th century, France faced its greatest trial. A long conflict with England began, the 100 Years' War. It was not a single war, but a century of battles, truces, and shifting fortunes. At first, France suffered. At Crécy and Agincourt, English longbowmen cut down French knights in fields of mud and blood. Kings were captured, cities lost, and despair spread across the land. But hope came in the form of a peasant girl, Joan of Arc. Claiming visions from God, she led French armies to victories, lifting the siege of Orléans and restoring faith in the crown. Captured and burned by the English, she became a martyr and later a saint. By the mid-15th century, France emerged victorious. The English were driven out, and the French crown was stronger than ever before. Chapter 7. The Renaissance in France. With peace came renewal. The French kings embraced the spirit of the Renaissance, which had begun in Italy. Palaces replaced castles, gardens bloomed with fountains, and art flourished. King François I invited artists like Leonardo da Vinci to his court. The chateau of the Loire Valley rose in elegance, blending Gothic and Renaissance styles. Literature thrived with poets and thinkers who brought new ideas of humanism and beauty. Paris became not only a political capital, but a cultural one, where scholars debated and artists dreamed. But harmony was fragile. In the 16th century, France was torn apart by religious wars. Protestants, called Huguenots, clashed with Catholics in streets and fields. The violence reached horror in 1572 during the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, when thousands of Huguenots were slain in Paris and across the land. At last, a new king rose, Henri IV, first of the Bourbon dynasty. Once a Protestant himself, he converted to Catholicism, declaring Paris is worth a mass. He issued the Edict of Nantes, granting tolerance to Protestants, and restored peace. France, though scarred, found stability once more. Chapter 9. The Age of Louis XIV, the Sun King. In the 17th century, France reached its zenith under Louis XIV, the Sun King. He declared "L'État, c'est moi," which meant "I am the state." His reign embodied absolute monarchy. He built the magnificent Palace of Versailles, where gilded halls and endless gardens proclaimed royal power. Nobles were drawn to his court, dazzled and controlled by ceremony and splendor. Under Louis, France became the most powerful nation in Europe. Its armies won wars. Its culture set the standard of elegance. Writers like Molière and Racine, artists and musicians flourished under royal patronage. Yet his wars drained the treasury, and his grandeur carried heavy costs. Still, Louis XIV left France transformed, the very image of royal power
Part
and
1.
glory.
The Land of the Rising Sun. Origins and Myths. Long before there were samurai and shoguns, long before the great cities of Kyoto and Edo rose, there were only the islands, drifting in a vast ocean, half hidden in mist. The Japanese call their land Nihon, or Nippon, the origin of the sun. To the rest of the world, it is known as Japan. The myths tell of a time before time, when the world was chaos, neither sky nor sea, but a shapeless void. From that void,
two divine beings appeared, Izanagi and Izanami. They stood upon the bridge of heaven, looking down at the swirling waters below. With a jeweled spear, they stirred the sea. As they lifted the spear, drops fell back and hardened into land. Thus was born the first island, and with it, the beginning of Japan. Izanagi and Izanami descended to this newborn earth, where they joined as husband and wife. From their union came the islands of the Japanese archipelago, one after another, stretching like pearls across the ocean. They gave life to rivers and mountains, trees and winds. Yet tragedy followed, for Izanami, the goddess, died, giving birth to the god of fire. Heartbroken, Izanagi journeyed into the underworld to bring her back, but he found only shadows and decay. Terrified, he fled, sealing the path with a great boulder. From his grief and cleansing came new gods, and among them the most radiant of all, Amaterasu, the sun goddess. She shone with such brilliance that the heavens themselves glowed. To her descendants, it was said, belonged the right to rule Japan. Even today, the Japanese emperor traces his divine line to Amaterasu, the eternal sun. But the sun, too, had shadows. There was Susanoo, the storm god, fierce and unpredictable, and Tsukuyomi, the moon. The myths of their quarrels shaped the rhythm of nature, day and night, calm and storm, light and darkness. These stories were more than tales. To the people of ancient Japan, they were the bones of the world, explaining why the land existed, why the sun rose first upon their islands, why the emperor himself was divine. Each shrine, each ritual, each whisper of prayer carried echoes of Izanagi's spear and Amaterasu's light. And so, Japan began, not with kings or warriors, but with gods and myths. A land born from sea foam and divine sorrow, destined always to be the place where the sun rises first.
Part 2. Early Japan, Jomon, Yayoi, and Kofun eras. Long before the rise of emperors, before the first palaces of Kyoto, the Japanese islands were home to ancient peoples whose lives were shaped by the forests, seas, and mountains. Their footsteps echo faintly still, like whispers beneath the soil. The first of these were the Jomon people, beginning more than 10,000 years ago. They were hunters and gatherers, living in harmony with the deep forests and rivers. They built pit dwellings, simple homes dug into the earth, warmed by fire. They fished in rivers and seas, hunted deer and wild boar, and gathered nuts and berries. Yet their greatest gift to memory was their pottery. The vessels of the Jomon are among the oldest in the world, coiled with ropes pressed into clay, swirling with patterns like flames. To hold one is to touch the imagination of a people who saw beauty even in the everyday act of storing food. Perhaps they believed their pots had spirits, for every pattern seemed alive, curling like smoke, or twisting like roots in the dark earth. Then, around the 3rd century BCE, a new people came across the seas from the Asian mainland. They brought with them rice, and with rice came transformation. These were the Yayoi. They settled the fertile plains, irrigated the land, and built villages that hummed with the rhythm of planting and harvest. With rice came surpluses, and with surpluses came wealth, power, and conflict. The Yayoi brought also bronze and iron. Bronze bells, dotaku,
rang in ritual fields, calling upon the gods for good harvests. Iron swords and tools changed warfare and farming alike. Slowly, society grew more stratified. Leaders emerged, clans grew powerful, and the seeds of kingdoms were sown. By the 3rd century CE, the age of the Kofun had begun. Its name means old mounds, for across Japan rose colossal tombs, great earthen keyhole-shaped mounds surrounded by moots, some stretching hundreds of meters in length. Within them lay the remains of powerful rulers, buried with armor, swords, and haniwa, clay figures of warriors, horses, dancers, and guardians, set upon the tombs like silent sentinels. The Kofun Age was a time of kings and warriors, a time when clans vied for dominance. From among them rose the Yamato clan, whose rulers would claim descent from Amaterasu herself. They would lay the foundations of what became the imperial line, a dynasty that, in name at least, continues unbroken to this day. So the story of early Japan is one of transformation, from the hunters of the forests to the rice farmers of the Yayoi Plains to the mighty rulers of the Kofun tombs. Each era layered upon the last, like waves upon the shore, shaping the land and the people who would one day call themselves Japanese.
Part 3. The Imperial Line and the Dawn of Nara. As the Kofun Mounds rose and the Yamato clan gathered power, a new idea began to take shape on the islands of Japan, the idea of a divine ruler, whose blood was not only human but heavenly. According to legend, the Yamato traced their ancestry to Amaterasu, the radiant sun goddess. From her line came Ninigi no Mikoto, who descended from heaven bearing the mirror, the jewel, and the sword, 3 sacred treasures that would forever symbolize imperial rule. His descendants became the first emperors, rulers not only of men, but of the balance between heaven and earth. By the 6th century, the Yamato court grew stronger. Their rulers gathered tribute, forged alliances, and reached across the sea to Korea and China. And from these lands came new ideas, flowing like waves into Japan: writing, Buddhism, Confucian thought, new styles of art and government. The islands were no longer isolated. They were part of the great currents of Asia. In the 8th century, a bold step was taken. A permanent capital was established in Nara, modeled on the Chinese city of Chang'an. Wide avenues, orderly blocks, and grand palaces rose from what had once been farmland. For the first time, Japan had a city that seemed to embody the permanence of power. In Nara, temples flourished. The most magnificent of all was Todai-ji, built to house the great Buddha, a towering bronze figure that gleamed in the light, his gaze serene, his hand raised in eternal blessing. To cast such a statue required the efforts of thousands, the wealth of a nation, the devotion of an empire. When it was unveiled, the people believed that the very presence of Buddha had entered their land. Yet Nara was not only a place of faith, it was also a place of politics, intrigue, and power. Noble families struggled for influence, monasteries grew wealthy and strong, and the emperor's role was caught between divine symbol and mortal ruler. Even then, you could feel the tension that would define Japanese history, the balance between the spiritual and the earthly, between the emperor's sacred place and the realities of power. But in Nara, the dream of a unified Japan, ruled by one divine line, became tangible. The emperors looked back to the myths of Amaterasu and forward to a land that was slowly weaving its own identity, neither wholly Chinese nor wholly its own, but something in between, something destined to shine in its own light.
Part 4. Heian Era, the world of courtly elegance. In the year 794, the capital moved once more, from Nara to a place that would become legendary, Heian-kyo, the capital of peace and tranquility. Today, it is known as Kyoto. Here began the Heian period, an age not of warriors, but of elegance. The emperors still ruled in name, yet true power began to flow through the noble families, especially the mighty Fujiwara clan. They married their daughters to emperors, became regents, and turned the court into a world of intrigue and refined ritual. Life in Heian was like a dream woven of silk and fragrance. The nobles lived in palaces of painted screens and gardens of cherry blossoms, their days filled with poetry, music, and games. Every detail mattered. The cut of a robe, the scent of incense, the calligraphy of a letter. A misplaced word, a poorly chosen color, could bring ruin to one's reputation. It was during this age that literature blossomed. Court ladies, often secluded behind screens, poured their feelings into words that would outlast empires. Murasaki Shikubi, a lady-in-waiting, wrote The Tale of Genji, a masterpiece often called the world's first novel. In it, she captured the romance, sorrow, and beauty of courtly life, a world where every glance and gesture carried the weight of destiny. Religion, too, took root in new ways. Buddhism spread through the land, mixing with ancient Shinto beliefs. The aristocrats built temples of breathtaking grace, where monks chanted sutras by lantern light, while outside, the night air filled with the hum of insects and the fragrance of pine. And yet, beneath this elegance, cracks began to form. While the nobles of Heian lived in a dream of beauty and verse, far beyond the capital, the provinces grew restless. Landholders armed themselves. Bands of warriors began to appear, in protecting estates, enforcing justice by the sword. In time, these warriors would rise to power, bringing an end to the delicate dream of Heian. But for centuries, Heian remained the golden age of courtly refinement. Even now, the beauty of Kyoto's gardens and temples carries whispers of that era, when the world of Japan seemed less a battlefield and more a poem.
Part 5. The Rise of the Samurai. As the courtiers of Heian drifted deeper into their world of poetry and perfumes, beyond the capital, another force was awakening. In the provinces, where rice fields stretched beneath mountains and rivers, power no longer belonged only to nobles in Kyoto. It belonged to those who could protect the land and take it by the sword. These were the bushi, the warriors. At first, they were hired by aristocrats and monasteries to guard estates, collect taxes, and defend borders. But in time, they began to serve themselves. They trained in archery and swordsmanship, rode swift horses, and lived by honor and loyalty to their clan. From these beginnings rose a new class, the samurai. The samurai were more than fighters. They embodied a way of life. They prized loyalty to their lord above all, and courage in the face of death. To retreat was shame. To betray was unforgivable. Their armor gleamed with lacquered plates, their helmets adorned with horns and crests, their bows long and powerful. And at their side, always, was the sword. Not only a weapon, but a soul. At first, they were bound to great families, such as the Taira and the Minamoto, clans that would one day clash for the fate of the nation. The Heian court still wrote poems, but the provinces whispered of battles, raids, and rivalries. The age of elegance was giving way to an age of war. Yet the samurai were not only warriors of blood. They also became warriors of spirit. From Buddhism, they absorbed the teachings of impermanence, that life is fleeting, like cherry blossoms falling in the spring wind. Death was not to be feared, but embraced with dignity. To die well was as important as to live well. In the quiet of the provinces, as the cherry blossoms drifted down upon the rivers, the samurai sharpened their swords and waited. Their time had not yet fully come, but already the balance of power was shifting. Soon, the court in Kyoto would learn that poems and incense could not stop steel.
The warriors of the provinces would rise, and once they had tasted power, they would never let it go.
Part 6. Kamakura Shogunate, Rule of the Warriors. The 12th century was an age of storms. The great clans of the provinces grew restless, and the court in Kyoto could no longer contain their rivalries. The most powerful among them were the Taira and the Minamoto. Their quarrel became legend, their battles sung by storytellers as the Heiki Monogatari, or the Tale of the Heiki. It was a story of loyalty and betrayal, of valor and tragedy. The Taira, proud and wealthy, held sway over the court, their warriors glittering in silk and armor. The Minamoto, hardened by exile and loss, waited for their chance to strike. When war came, it shook the land. Samurai clashed by rivers and mountains, their banners fluttering like wings of ravens. The final battle at Danonura in 1185 ended with the Taira's defeat. Their last child emperor was carried into the sea by his grandmother, vanishing beneath the waves as if the ocean itself had claimed the clan's pride. From this storm emerged the leader of the Minamoto, Minamoto no Yoritomo. Yet he did not rule from Kyoto's court. Instead, he established his power far to the east in a small coastal town, Kamakura. Here, in 1192, he took the title of shogun, the supreme commander of Japan's warriors. This was the birth of the Kamakura shogunate, the first warrior government. The emperor still sat upon his throne in Kyoto, cloaked in divine authority, but true power now rested in the hands of the shogun and his samurai. The age of warriors had begun. Under the Kamakura shogunate, Japan faced its greatest external threat. Across the sea, the Mongols had conquered vast empires and now turned their gaze to the islands. Twice they came, in 1274 and 1281, bringing fleets of ships and thousands of warriors. The samurai fought bravely, yet the odds were impossible. And then the winds came. Typhoons swept across the sea, scattering the Mongol ships, wrecking them upon the shores. The Japanese called it kamikaze, the divine wind. They believed the gods themselves had protected their land. The Mongols never returned. But even divine winds could not calm the storms within. The shogunate grew weak, torn by corruption and rebellion. By the 14th century, new powers were rising, ready to challenge Kamakura's hold. And so, the age of the first shoguns drew to a close, leaving behind a legacy of warriors, storms, and the belief that the gods themselves watched over the islands of the rising sun.
Part 7. The Age of Warring States, Sengoku Jidai. The 14th and 15th centuries shattered Japan into fragments. The emperor in Kyoto held little more than ceremony. The shogun in name was weak, and across the land powerful warlords, daimyo, carved their own realms from blood and fire. This was the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states. Castles rose upon mountains, rivers turned red with battle, and alliances shifted like shadows in the wind. For nearly a century and a half, Japan was torn by endless wars, each lord seeking to unite the land under his banner. In this world, the samurai thrived, bound by loyalty, yet ever tested by ambition. They lived and died for their daimyo, charging into battle beneath banners painted with clan symbols. The clash of steel, the thunder of arquebuses, brought later by the Portuguese, and the smoke of burning villages, these became the rhythm of the age. Out of this chaos rose three men, remembered as the great unifiers of Japan. First was Oda Nobunaga, fierce and ruthless. He used cunning strategy and embraced the new weapons of gunpowder, crushing his enemies with fire and iron. His ambition knew no bounds, yet betrayal struck him down, burned alive by one of his own generals. Next came Toyotomi Hideyoshi, once a peasant, who rose by wit and loyalty to become master of Japan. He completed much of Nobunaga's conquest, uniting the fractured clans beneath his rule. Hideyoshi dreamed of greater glory still, even launching invasions across the sea into Korea. But death claimed him before his dreams were fulfilled. And finally, Tokugawa Ieyasu, patient and calculating. At the great battle of Sekigahara in 1600, his forces crushed their rivals. From the smoke and silence of that battlefield, Tokugawa emerged as the victor who would bring centuries of war to an end. The Sengoku Jidai was an age of fire and chaos, of betrayal and ambition, but also of heroes whose names still echo through Japanese history. From its storms would rise a new order, one of peace, isolation, and the iron rule of the Tokugawa.
Part 8. The Tokugawa Shogunate, Peace and Isolation. After centuries of war, the land lay weary. Villages smoldered, castles crumbled, and the people longed for peace. It was then that Tokugawa Ieyasu, the cautious victor of Sekigahara, claimed the title of shogun in 1603. His rule began an age that would last more than 250 years, the Tokugawa Shogunate, or the Edo period. From his new capital in Edo, the city that would one day be called Tokyo, Ieyasu and his descendants ruled Japan with patience and iron. The emperor remained in Kyoto, cloaked in divine tradition, but the shogun's word carried the power of law. To ensure loyalty, the Tokugawa imposed strict order. The daimyo were bound to the system of Sankin Kotai. They had to spend every other year in Edo, leaving their families behind as hostages when they returned to their domains. Roads bustled with processions of lords, their retainers in long lines, banners flying, armor gleaming, a theater of obedience. The samurai, once warriors of endless battles, found themselves in a new role. With peace, their swords were rarely drawn. They became administrators, scholars, and bureaucrats, living stipends rather than plunder. Yet they clung to the Bushido, the way of the warrior, a code of honor, loyalty, and discipline that defined their very souls. The Tokugawa also turned Japan inward. Foreigners were expelled, Christianity banned, and trade tightly controlled. Only a few Dutch and Chinese merchants were allowed in Nagasaki, confined to a small island called Dejima. For over 2 centuries, Japan lived in Sakoku, closed country, sealed from the storms of the outside world. Yet within these walls of peace, culture flourished. Edo became a city of 1 million souls, its streets alive with merchants, artisans, and performers. The ukiyo, the floating world, gave rise to kabuki theater, woodblock prints of courtesans and landscapes, and the haiku poetry of masters like Matsuo Basho, who wandered the land, capturing eternity in 17 syllables. Peace was heavy, orderly, unyielding, but it allowed art, commerce, and beauty to bloom. While the world beyond Japan was convulsed by empires and revolutions, the islands of the rising sun dreamed within their walls of stone and silence. But even silence cannot last forever. Beyond the seas, ships with black smoke and iron guns waited, and soon they would come to the shores of Edo, shaking the Tokugawa world to its core.
Part 9. The World of the Samurai. For centuries, the samurai had lived by the sword, their lives bound to the chaos of war. But under the Tokugawa shogunate,
peace stretched on and on. With no great battles to fight, the warriors found themselves in a strange new role, guardians of order, symbols of loyalty, living relics of an age of blood. Yet the samurai spirit did not vanish. It was preserved in a code, Bushido, the way of the warrior. Bushido taught loyalty unto death, courage in the face of hopeless odds, self-discipline sharper than the edge of a blade. Honor was life itself. To live dishonorably was a fate worse than death. At the heart of this world was the sword, not just a weapon, but a soul. The katana was forged with fire and folded steel, its edge said to be as perfect as a moonlit line upon the water. Samurai polished their blades with reverence, believing the spirit of their ancestors dwelt within the steel. When honor was lost, there remained only one path, seppuku. With calm ritual, the samurai would cut open his own belly, offering his life to cleanse shame, to prove loyalty, to preserve dignity. To outsiders, it seemed a horror. To the samurai, it was the truest expression of their way. But not all samurai served great lords. Some became ronin, masterless men, wandering the land. Some turned mercenary, others lived in poverty, and a few became legends. The tale of the 47 ronin is remembered above all. Loyal retainers who avenged their fallen master, even knowing it would cost them their lives. Their story became a symbol of loyalty, sacrifice, and the eternal heart of the warrior. And in quieter times, the samurai turned to study. Many became poets, painters, or teachers of martial arts. They practiced Zen meditation, finding in silence the same discipline they once found in war. In gardens and temples, they sought balance, the stillness of mind that could guide the strike of a sword. Thus, the world of the samurai was more than battle. It was a philosophy, a discipline, a way of being. Even in peace, their spirit lived in every bow, every verse, every quiet step upon the tatami mats. And though the age of the samurai would one day pass, their legacy would remain, carved not only in steel, but in the soul of Japan itself.
Part 10. The Fall of the Shoguns. Arrival of the Black Ships. For over 2 centuries, Japan had lived in seclusion, its gates closed to the outside world. The Tokugawa shogunate ruled with rigid order, and the islands dreamed within their walls of peace. But across the oceans, the world was changing. Empires rose, machines roared, and ships of iron and smoke cut through the seas. In the summer of 1853, they came. 4 great American warships, their hulls black with coal smoke, their cannons gleaming, entered Edo Bay. The Japanese called them the Black Ships. At their head was Commodore Matthew Perry, carrying demands from the United States. Japan must open its ports or face the fire of modern guns. For the samurai who watched from the shores, it was as if monsters had risen from the sea. Their own ships were small and fragile, their matchlock guns centuries old. Against the Black Ships, they were powerless. The divine winds of the Mongol invasions did not come. This time, there was no kamikaze. The shogunate yielded. Treaties were signed, ports opened, foreign merchants entered. Yet with them came humiliation, unequal agreements, foreign privileges, and the bitter truth that Japan had fallen behind. Discontent spread like wildfire. Samurai, merchants, and peasants alike questioned the shogunate's weakness. The cry of "Sono Joei," revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, echoed across the land. In Kyoto, the emperor, long a shadow in politics, suddenly became the symbol of resistance and renewal. The Tokugawa, once unshakable, now wavered. Their authority crumbled under the weight of foreign pressure and domestic unrest. Domains like Satsuma and Choshu rose in defiance, their leaders dreaming of a new order. The age of the shoguns, which had endured for centuries, was drawing to its end. From the smoke of the black ships, a new Japan would rise, forged in fire, modern, restless, and yet still bound to the spirit of the rising sun.
Part 11. The New Japan. From Empire to Modern Age. The black ships had torn open Japan's gates, and from the wound poured change. The old Tokugawa order collapsed, and in its place came a revolution. In 1868, power was formally restored to the emperor, a young boy named Mutsuhito, who would take the name Meiji, meaning enlightened rule. Thus began the Meiji Restoration, not merely the return of an emperor, but the rebirth of a nation. The cry was simple, Fukoku Kyohei, enrich the country, strengthen the army. Samurai cut off their topknots and donned Western suits. Castles gave way to railroads, silk robes to uniforms, rice stipends to salaries. Schools spread across the land, teaching science, engineering, and foreign languages. The printing press carried new ideas. Factories filled the air with smoke. Japan, once secluded, raced to catch the modern world. Yet change brought pain. The samurai, stripped of their ancient privileges, rose in protest. In 1877, the last great rebellion erupted, led by Saigo Takamori, a man remembered as the last true samurai. His warriors fought bravely, swords against rifles and cannon, but the new imperial army crushed them. The old ways died upon the battlefield. By the dawn of the 20th century, Japan had transformed. No longer a land of isolation, it had become an empire. It defeated China in 1895, then Russia in 1905, a shock to the world, for never before had an Asian nation humbled a European power. Japan's empire stretched across Korea, Taiwan, and beyond. But with ambition came shadows. The same fires that fueled progress also burned toward war. In the 20th century, Japan's path would lead to devastation. A war across Asia, the destruction of cities, the atomic fire of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Out of that darkness, however, Japan rose again, rebuilding itself as a nation of peace, technology, and culture. From swords to steam engines, from wooden castles to neon towers, Japan had journeyed farther than its ancestors could have dreamed. Yet through every change, the spirit of the rising sun remained, resilient, enduring, eternal. Part 12. Closing Reflections. The Eternal Rising Sun. The story of Japan is a tale of cycles, of birth and rebirth, of tradition and change. From islands born in myth, stirred from the sea by divine hands, to an empire that stretched across oceans, to a modern nation of towers and trains, Japan has carried with it the spirit of the rising sun. Through the centuries, the Japanese people have endured war and peace, famine and abundance, silence and storm. They have seen their world transformed again and again, yet always they return to their roots, the cherry blossoms that bloom and fall each spring, the shrines that stand quietly in forests, the reverence for ancestors who still walk in memory. The samurai are gone, their swords resting in museums and shrines, yet their spirit lingers. Bushido, the way of honor and discipline, breathes still in Japanese art, in duty,
in the quiet persistence of a people who refuse to be broken. The emperors, once divine rulers, now reign in symbol only. Yet their presence, unbroken across millennia, links the present to the dawn of myth, a reminder of Amaterasu's light, of the first spears stirring the sea. Today, Japan shines as both ancient and new. Neon lights blaze in Tokyo, yet pilgrims still climb Mount Fuji in silence. Bullet trains race across the land, yet in Kyoto's gardens, stillness reigns. The modern and the eternal walk side by side, like the sun and the moon sharing the sky. And so, as night falls, imagine the land of the rising sun. Picture the mountains wrapped in mist, the waves rolling upon quiet shores, the lanterns glowing in temples where monks chant softly in the dark. Above it all, the sun waits, eternal, patient, ready to rise again. For Japan is more than an island nation. It is a dream woven from myth, battle,
Part
and
1.
beauty.
The
A
lands
dream
of the
that
north,
endures
origins
as
and
eternal
myths of
as
the
the
Vikings.
rising sun.
Far in the northern reaches of the world, where winters are long and the nights seem endless, the land itself shaped a people of iron and fire. Mountains rose like jagged spears, fjords cut deep into the earth, and the sea stretched cold and merciless. It was here, in the lands of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, that the Vikings were born. Life was harsh, yet the people of the north did not see their world as empty or barren. To them, every mountain, every storm, every tree was alive with spirit. And above all things towered the great cosmic tree, Yggdrasil, the world tree, whose roots reached into the underworld and whose branches touched the heavens. At the center of this mythic universe sat Odin, the All-Father. He was a god of wisdom and war who had sacrificed one of his eyes for knowledge. He wandered the 9 worlds, accompanied by his ravens Hukin and Munin, thought and memory. To the Vikings, Odin was both a bringer of victory and a reminder that wisdom always comes at a price. Beside him stood Thor, red-bearded and mighty, hammer Mjolnir in hand, protector of gods and men. When thunder rolled across the fjords, the people said it was Thor riding in his chariot, defending them against the giants of chaos. Then there was Loki, the trickster. Neither fully a friend nor a foe, he wove deception and change, shaping fate in ways no one could predict. His name was whispered with fear and fascination, for where Loki walked, upheaval followed. The Vikings did not see their gods as distant, perfect beings. They were fierce, flawed, and close, sharing in the struggles of men. Around fires, storytellers recited sagas of creation and doom, of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, when even Odin and Thor would fall in battle and the world would burn, only to rise again, anew. In the glow of torchlight, children listened wide-eyed as their elders told them, "Our lives are part of this great cycle. We are born of the frost and fire, of gods and giants, of courage and fate." Thus, before the first raid, before the first sail caught the northern wind, the Vikings were already bound to destiny, shaped by their land, guided by their myths, and driven by the knowledge that the end would come, but honor would live forever. Part 2. Life in the North, Farmers, Raiders, and Seafarers. The people of the North were not born raiders. They were first and foremost farmers and fishermen, carving life from soil and sea. Their villages clung to the edges of fjords, clusters of wooden longhouses with roofs of turf and smoke rising from hearths within. In summer, fields of barley and rye rippled in the cold wind. Families worked together to tend the land, while women wove wool into warm garments and men mended nets for the next voyage.
Goats and cattle grazed in the meadows, chickens scratched in the yards. Life was simple, harsh, but full of rhythm. Yet the sea was always calling. To the Vikings, the ocean was both pathway and peril. They built their famous longships, sleek and strong, carved with dragon heads at the prow. With shallow keels, these ships could ride the open sea or slip silently up rivers, carrying warriors, merchants, or settlers alike. Inside their long houses, firelight flickered against carved beams. Families ate stews of fish and meat, drank mead from horns, and listened to skalds, the poets and storytellers who recited sagas of heroes and gods. These tales kept alive the memory of ancestors and taught the young what it meant to be Viking, to be brave, generous, and loyal, to face hardship without fear. But life in the north was never easy. Winters were cruel, harvests uncertain. A single storm could destroy crops. A single famine could end a village. The need for survival pushed the Vikings to look beyond their fjords. Some sought trade, some sought new lands, and many, hungry for wealth and glory, turned to raiding. In spring, when the seas calmed, ships were drawn from their sheds, sails unfurled, and men set forth. Farmers became warriors, fishermen became sailors, and ordinary villagers transformed into explorers and conquerors. The same hands that had tilled the soil now gripped axes and spears. To their families left behind, it was never certain if the men would return. But in the heart of every Viking was the belief that fate was woven by the Norns, and courage in the face of death was the greatest honor. Thus the Viking world was built on contrasts, peace and war, earth and sea, home and journey. They were farmers, raiders, and seafarers, bound to the land, yet destined always to follow the wind. Part 3. The Viking Raids, Fury Across Europe. The year was 793 when the world first trembled at the name of the Northmen. On the holy island of Lindisfarne, off the coast of England, monks lived in quiet prayer. One summer's day, their silence was broken by the crash of oars and the howl of horns. From the sea came the longships, their dragon prows cutting through the waves, sails striped red and white. The raiders leapt ashore, tall men with axes and swords, their shields painted with fierce symbols. The monastery fell in fire and blood, its treasures carried away, its holy relics scattered. The news spread swiftly. The Vikings had come. From that day, for nearly 3 centuries, the fury of the North swept across Europe. They struck the coasts of England, Ireland, and France, their ships gliding silently up rivers to attack towns far inland. No church, no village, no market was safe. The very word Viking came to mean terror. But they were more than destroyers. In Ireland, they built strongholds like Dublin, which grew from a Viking camp into a great trading city. Along the coasts of France, they forced kings to pay tribute, silver to buy peace. In time, one Viking leader, Rollo, was granted land in northern France. This land became Normandy, the land of the Northmen. Still, the raids were brutal. Monks wrote of the endless flood of heathens, and peasants prayed for deliverance. To the Vikings, however, these raids were a way of life, a chance for wealth, for fame, for a warrior's death that would open the gates of Valhalla. The longships carried them everywhere. They plundered the rich cities of the Mediterranean, even daring to raid Seville in Muslim Spain. They sailed into the east, down the rivers of Russia, trading and raiding as far as Byzantium, where they served as mercenaries in the Varangian Guard. For Europe, they were a storm that came without warning. For the Vikings, it was destiny to seek riches, to carve names into history, to live boldly and die bravely. And so the fury of the raids became legend, a time when the sea kings of the north ruled not only their fjords, but the fears of half the world.
Part 4. The Great Voyages, Beyond the Edge of the World. The Vikings were not only raiders, they were explorers, driven by curiosity as much as by hunger for land. Their long ships, light and swift, were unlike any other vessels of their time. With them, they sailed farther than any dared imagine, into seas no map had charted. First, they turned west. The islands of the North Atlantic opened before them, the Shetlands, the Faroes, and beyond them a land of fire and ice, Iceland. There they settled, carving farms from volcanic rock, founding a free society where chieftains gathered at the Althing, one of the oldest parliaments in the world. But their eyes did not stop there. Around the year 985, Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland, sailed into the unknown and found a vast icy shore. He named it Greenland to lure settlers with hope. Against the frozen winds, they built homes, churches, and farms, clinging to life at the edge of the world. And still, the horizon called. Eric's son, Leif Erikson, sailed even further west. His ship touched the shores of a new world, a land of forests and grapes, rich and strange. The sagas called it Vinland. Today, we know it as North America. Nearly 500 years before Columbus, the Vikings had reached its coasts. Though their colonies in Vinland were brief, their voyages were unmatched. To the east, other Vikings, the Varangians, followed rivers into the heart of Russia, founding trade routes that reached all the way to Constantinople. Some entered the service of the Byzantine emperors, their axes gleaming in the halls of the Eastern Empire. The Vikings were not afraid of the edges of the map. To them, the sea was a road, and every horizon a promise. They sailed not only for conquest, but for discovery, for the chance to plant farms, raise families, and carve new lives upon unknown shores. And so the legends of the great voyages lived on in sagas, where gods and men walked side by side, and where the sea kings of the north seemed destined to touch every corner of the world. Part 5. The Age of Kings, Power and Legacy. By the 10th century, the chaos of raids and voyages began to give way to something new. The Vikings, once wandering sea kings, started to build kingdoms of their own. From Norway to Denmark, from Sweden to the Isles of the North Atlantic, rulers rose who sought not only plunder, but power. In Denmark, kings like Harald Bluetooth united tribes beneath one crown and raised monuments to their deeds. Harald himself is remembered for bringing Christianity to his land, marking the shift from the old gods to the new faith. His rune stones, carved with crosses and inscriptions, still stand as silent witnesses to the moment when Odin and Thor began to give way to Christ. In Norway, warlords fought for mastery of the fjords. At last, Harald Fairhair claimed victory, uniting the realm under one banner. The sagas say he vowed never to cut his hair until he had brought all Norway under his rule. And when he did, he washed his long locks and took the name Fairhair. In Sweden, the Vikings turned east, shaping trade and conquest along the rivers that led to Novgorod and Kyiv. They became not just raiders, but founders of dynasties, weaving their bloodlines into the history of the Rus. Even abroad, Viking leaders carved realms of power. In England, a Viking known as Canute the Great ruled not only over the North Sea, but over a true empire that stretched across Denmark, Norway, and England itself. For a time, the sea kings became kings of land as well.
their crowns heavy with more than silver, with legitimacy, authority, and legacy. Yet power came at a price. As kingdoms formed, the old ways began to fade. The wild freedom of raids and voyages gave way to order, taxation, and law. The new faith of Christianity spread across Scandinavia. At first resisted, it soon became embraced by kings who saw in it a path to greater power, linking them to the crowns of Europe. The old gods of Odin, Thor, and Frey faded into memory, their stories preserved only in sagas whispered by poets. In England, the Viking dream ended at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066. There, King Harald Hardrada of Norway led a mighty force, but he fell with an arrow through his throat. The same year, William of Normandy, himself descended from Vikings, conquered England, closing one chapter of Norse history as he opened another. The raids that once terrified Europe became fewer as kingdoms turned from plunder to politics. Scandinavian rulers focused on building nations, forging alliances, and expanding through trade rather than war. The free-spirited raiders of the fjords became subjects of monarchs, bound by law and church. Yet the legacy of the Vikings did not die. Their blood ran through kings and nobles across Europe. Their ships and settlements changed the map from Dublin to Kyiv, from Greenland to Normandy. Their sagas carried the memory of gods and heroes, of voyages across stormy seas, of courage in the face of fate. And so the Viking Age ended not with a single battle, but with transformation. The sea kings of the north became fathers of nations. Their longships rest in museums. Their myths echo in literature. Their spirit endures in the northern lands where the aurora dances in the night sky. For though the twilight fell upon the Vikings, their story still shines, a tale of storm and sea, of gods and men, of endings
Part 1.
and eternal
The birth
memory.
of Rome, from myth to republic. Long before the grand arches, the marble forums, and the legions that would march across the world, there was only a river, a forest, and a dream. The land we now call Italy was wild, covered in rolling hills and fertile plains, with the Tiber River flowing quietly through its heart. It is said that in these hills lived twin brothers, Romulus and Remus. Sons of the war god Mars and a mortal woman, they were cast away as infants, set adrift upon the waters of the Tiber. Fate would not let them perish. A she-wolf, fierce yet tender, found the crying children and nursed them beneath the shade of a fig tree. From this strange beginning, the destiny of a city was born. When the brothers grew, they dreamed of founding a new settlement upon the hills where they had been saved. But even destiny is not without conflict. Romulus quarreled with Remus, and in anger struck him down. Alone, Romulus claimed the Palatine Hill as his own, and there, in the year 753 BCE, he drew the first furrow of Rome's walls. He named the city after himself, Roma. Rome's earliest days were fragile. It was a small village of huts on the 7 hills, surrounded by stronger peoples, the Etruscans to the north, the Latins and Sabines nearby. Yet the Romans grew, bold and cunning. They welcomed exiles and wanderers, thieves and outcasts. Rome became a refuge for the unwanted, a gathering of the restless. To ensure the city's survival, Romulus and his followers took wives in a tale remembered as the rape of the Sabine women, a dark yet symbolic story of how Romans forged bonds by force, then by reconciliation. For in time, the Sabines joined with Rome, becoming one people. Kings ruled Rome for centuries, each leaving their mark. Some built temples, others roads and walls.
Yet the Romans, fiercely proud, would one day tire of kings. The last monarch, Tarquin the Proud, was overthrown in anger, and in his place the Romans created something new, the Republic. No man would rule as king again. Instead, power was shared between consuls, guided by the Senate, checked by laws and traditions. It was a system born of struggle, yet it gave Rome resilience. The Republic became more than a city. It became an idea of citizenship, of duty, of discipline, and of endless ambition. Thus, from myth and blood, from wolves and warriors, Rome was born. A city destined to rise beyond its hills, to spread its name across the world, and to shape history for millennia to come. Part 2. The Rise of the Roman Empire, Glory and Power. The Republic grew like a flame spreading across dry grass. From its humble beginnings, Rome extended its reach over the Italian peninsula, forging alliances, fighting wars, and binding conquered peoples with roads, treaties, and discipline. The Romans were relentless. They built the Via Appia, the Appian Way, stretching like a vein of stone across the land. Their legions, disciplined, ironclad, and tireless, marched upon it, carrying Rome's power to distant fields. Every soldier was both warrior and builder, wielding not only sword and shield, but also shovel and pickaxe, leaving behind forts and roads as they advanced. Conflict tested them. The wars with Carthage, the Punic Wars, became legendary. When Hannibal, the Carthaginian general, crossed the Alps with elephants, the Romans faced disaster. Yet they endured, adapting, learning, never yielding. At last, Rome triumphed, razing Carthage to the ground, salting its fields, and claiming mastery of the Mediterranean. With conquest came wealth. Grain from Egypt, gold from Gaul, slaves from every land. Rome became a city of marble, its streets filled with temples, basilicas, and markets where goods from every corner of the known world were sold. But wealth also brought division. Senators schemed, generals grew ambitious. Into this storm stepped Julius Caesar, brilliant, bold, and merciless. He conquered Gaul, his name whispered with both admiration and fear. When he crossed the Rubicon with his army, civil war erupted. Rome was no longer content with the balance of the Republic. It was ready to crown new masters. Though Caesar fell beneath the daggers of conspirators, his vision lived on. His heir, Octavian, Augustus, became the first emperor. With him, the Roman Empire was born. Augustus cloaked his rule in the old forms of the Republic, but he held true power. Under his reign, Rome knew peace, the Pax Romana. Roads stretched farther than ever before. Aqueducts carried water to the growing metropolis, and legions guarded frontiers from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Germania. The empire was not only power, but spectacle. The Colosseum rose, where gladiators fought beneath the roar of tens of thousands. Chariots thundered through the Circus Maximus. Emperors displayed their generosity through games, bread, and monuments. Rome was the heart of the world, a city of marble and fire, of order and ambition. Its name carried fear and awe, its eagle standards casting shadows across 3 continents. From the myth of Romulus to the rule of Augustus, Rome had become eternal. Or so it seemed. Part 3. The Fall of Rome, Crisis and Transformation. No empire, however mighty, lasts forever. For centuries, Rome ruled the Mediterranean world, but beneath its marble skin, cracks began to spread. The vastness of the empire stretched its legions thin. Borders had to be defended from countless enemies, Persians in the east, Goths and Vandals in the north. Each frontier was a fire that never ceased to burn. Wealth that once poured into Rome now drained away. Corruption spread in the Senate. Taxes weighed heavily on farmers, and slaves replaced free laborers. The heart of Rome, once strong with citizen soldiers, began to weaken. In the 3rd century, crisis consumed the empire. Emperors rose and fell like shadows, assassinated, betrayed, replaced by ambitious generals. Civil wars tore at the fabric of Rome. For a time, the empire nearly shattered into pieces. And yet, Rome endured. Emperors like Diocletian tried to bring order, dividing the empire into East and West. Constantine the Great brought even greater change, embracing a new faith, Christianity. From his reign onward, the cross rose beside the eagle, and the old gods of Jupiter and Mars gave way to the worship of Christ. But unity was fragile. By the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire faced storm after storm. The Goths crossed the frontiers, sacking Rome itself in 410. The Vandals followed, sweeping across Spain and Africa, striking at Rome from the sea. And then came the Huns, fierce riders from the steppes, pressing upon the borders with fire and terror. Finally, in 476 CE, the last Western emperor, a boy named Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic leader Odoacer. The symbol of Rome's might was gone. Yet Rome did not vanish entirely. In the east, at Constantinople, the empire endured as Byzantium, carrying Roman law, language, and power for another 1,000 years. And in the west, the ruins of Rome became seeds for new kingdoms, barbarian rulers who adopted Roman ways, building on its ashes. The fall of Rome was not a single moment, but a slow transformation, an ending, yet also a beginning. The eternal city lay in shadow, its forums empty, its aqueducts broken, but its memory lingered. The dream of Rome, its laws, its roads, its vision of empire, would never truly die.
Part 4. The Middle Ages in Italy, Fragmented Lands and New Powers. When the Western Roman Empire fell, Italy did not find peace. Instead, the peninsula became a patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, and foreign powers. The ruins of Rome stood silent, yet new rulers claimed its lands, each shaping Italy in their own image. The first to come were the Ostrogoths, followed by the Byzantines, who sought to reclaim the old heart of empire. Then, in the 6th century, the Lombards swept into Italy, carving it into duchies and kingdoms. Their rule left traces in names, laws, and traditions, but it also deepened Italy's divisions. Amidst this turmoil, the papacy rose in power. The Bishop of Rome, once a spiritual leader, became also a temporal prince. The Papal States stretched across central Italy, guarded by faith and politics alike. Popes clashed with emperors, claimed crowns, and wielded influence far beyond their cities' walls. Meanwhile, in the north, the great cities of Italy began to stir. Venice, born from refugees who had fled to the lagoons during invasions, grew into a republic of merchants and sailors. Its fleets ruled the Adriatic, its traders carried silk and spices, and its palaces shimmered with wealth drawn from the seas. Florence, Milan, Genoa, Pisa, each rose as city-states governed by merchants, nobles, or condottieri, mercenary captains who sold their swords to the highest bidder. These cities warred and allied with one another, competing for land, influence, and glory. The Middle Ages in Italy were turbulent, yet fertile. Monasteries preserved books, scholars debated faith and reason. Artists carved new visions from stone. Cathedrals soared upward, their spires piercing the sky, while streets bustled with artisans, bakers, goldsmiths, and merchants calling out their trade. Italy was no longer the heart of a single empire, but a mosaic of powers. papal Rome, mercantile Venice, proud Florence, ambitious Milan. Fragmented though it was, this Italy laid the foundation for something new. From its rivalries, wealth, and restless spirit would come a rebirth unlike any the world had ever seen, the Renaissance. Part 5. The Italian Renaissance, Dawn of a New Age. As the Middle Ages waned, a new light began to rise over Italy, a dawn of art, science, and human spirit. This was the Renaissance, a rebirth of classical wisdom and creativity that would transform not only Italy, but all of Europe. The spark ignited in Florence, a city of bankers and weavers, of merchants and dreamers. Here the powerful Medici family rose, patrons of art and learning, their wealth feeding a flowering of culture. In their palaces and churches, artists found support to paint, sculpt, and imagine as never before. It was an age of giants. Leonardo da Vinci, painter, inventor, thinker, whose notebooks brimmed with visions of flying machines and anatomy drawn with precision. Michelangelo, who carved the David from marble, painted the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and left behind works that seemed to touch the divine. Raphael, whose graceful Madonnas and luminous frescoes filled Rome with beauty. But the Renaissance was more than art. It was the revival of humanism, the belief that mankind, not only heaven, was worthy of study. Scholars read the old works of Greece and Rome, translated ancient texts, and questioned the world around them. Astronomy, mathematics, and medicine advanced, challenging the boundaries of medieval thought. The cities of Italy became jewel boxes of brilliance. Venice glowed with mosaics and music, a crossroads of East and West. Rome, revitalized by ambitious popes, adorned itself with basilicas, sculptures, and grand piazzas. Florence hummed with artists, poets, and philosophers debating under painted ceilings. And beyond beauty lay ambition. Explorers and sailors, supported by Italian knowledge and craft, ventured across the seas. Genoese captains like Christopher Columbus carried European banners to the New World, forever altering history. The Renaissance was not only a time of peace. Rivalry still burned, wars raged between city-states, and foreign powers eyed Italy's riches. Yet even in strife, creation thrived. For every fortress built, a chapel was painted. For every battle fought, a poem was written. This was the age when Italy shined as the beating heart of civilization, a land where art reached for the heavens and man rediscovered both his past and his boundless potential. Part 6. Legacy of Italy, from Ancient Glory to Eternal Renaissance. The story of Italy is a story of cycles, of rise, fall, and rebirth. From the wolf that nursed Romulus, to the emperors who ruled the world, to the artists who painted ceilings like the sky itself, Italy has lived many lives, yet always remained eternal. Rome gave the world its laws, its roads, its vision of empire. Even when the city crumbled, its memory shaped kingdoms, churches, and empires for centuries to come. The idea of Rome never died. It became the foundation of Europe itself. In the Middle Ages, Italy's struggles gave birth to independence, trade, and rivalry. Out of that fire emerged a creativity that changed humanity. The Renaissance was not only Italian, but Italian at its heart. Its art, its ideas, and its spirit spread from Florence, Venice, and Rome to Paris, London, Madrid, and beyond. Italy taught the world to see beauty in marble and canvas, to question, to explore, to dream. Michelangelo's David still stands. Leonardo's sketches still astonish. Dante's words still echo. They are not relics of the past, but voices that speak across time. And even today, Italy carries its legacy. The ruins of the Colosseum remind us of empire. The domes of Florence remind us of rebirth. The piazzas, the cathedrals, the art and the food, the music of language, all whisper of centuries when Italy was the world stage. From Rome to the Renaissance, Italy's journey is one of struggle and triumph, darkness and brilliance. A land that gave the world both empire and enlightenment, both law and beauty. The eternal city, the radiant republics, the golden age of art, all are chapters in a single story, the story of Italy, whose spirit continues to shine like the sun upon its hills, forever reborn, forever eternal.
Part 1. The Origins of the Celts, from Hallstatt to La Tène. Long before the Romans marched across Europe, long before Christian monks wrote the sagas of Ireland, there were the Celts. Their story began in the heart of Central Europe, in the valleys and forests near the Danube River. Around 800 BCE, the culture we now call Hallstatt took root, named after a lakeside village in Austria, where salt mines preserved treasures of their world. The Hallstatt people were miners, metal workers, and traders. They forged strong iron weapons and ornate jewelry, buried their chieftains in grand barrows with wagons, feasts, and golden torques. Their wealth came from salt, the white gold of the ancient world, which they traded far and wide. Centuries later, around 450 BCE, a new flowering emerged, the La Tène culture. Named after a lakeshore site in Switzerland, it was marked by spirals, flowing lines, and intricate designs carved into swords, shields, and ornaments. This was the high art of the Celts, alive with symbolism and mystery. From these roots, the Celts spread across Europe. They were not a single nation, but many tribes, bound by language, culture, and a fierce love of freedom. From the forests of Gaul to the coasts of Iberia, from the Alps to the misty isles of Britain and Ireland, the Celts carried their spirit into every land they touched. Part 2. Myths and the Other World. Gods, Heroes, and Druids. The Celts lived in two worlds, the visible and the unseen. Their myths spoke of the other world, a realm both close and distant, where gods and spirits dwelled, where the dead feasted in eternal halls, and where time flowed differently. At the heart of their pantheon was the Dagda, the good god, master of abundance and wisdom, carrying a cauldron that never emptied and a harp that controlled the seasons. There was Lugh of the long arm, bright and skilled in every art, the warrior king whose spear never missed, and the dark goddess Morrigan, a shapeshifter of ravens and shadows who presided over battle and fate. The Tuatha De Danann, a race of shining beings, were said to have descended from the skies into Ireland, bringing with them treasures of magic and power. Their stories mingled with those of heroes like Cuchulainn and Fionn mac Cumhaill, whose deeds filled the sagas with wonder. Guardians of these mysteries were the Druids. More than priests, they were judges, healers, poets, and keepers of memory. They carried no books, for their knowledge was spoken, preserved in verse and ritual. They knew the cycles of the stars, the ways of the oak and mistletoe, the hidden paths between worlds. To the Celts, Druids were bridges between the mortal and the divine. Part 3. Warriors of the tribes, the fierce Celtic spirit. The Celts were famed as warriors, their courage both admired and feared. Greek and Roman writers described them as tall, wild-haired, their bodies painted with bright colors, sometimes with blue woad that made them seem otherworldly in battle. They wore golden torques around their necks, symbols of pride and status.
Part 4. Celtic Lands and Peoples, from Gaul to Ireland. By the height of their power, the Celts stretched across much of Europe. In Gaul, the lands of modern France, great tribes like the Aedui and Arverni built strongholds upon high hills, their markets buzzing with trade, their warriors ready to defend their honor. In Britain, tribes ruled over fertile fields and sacred groves. Here, Druids held great authority, guiding both kings and common folk, teaching that the forests and rivers themselves were holy. In Ireland, the Celts found a land of deep green and stone, where myths grew like roots through every hill. Unlike Gaul, Ireland would never fall to Rome. Its legends survived, preserved by poets and monks, telling of warriors, gods, and journeys to the otherworld. Farther south, the Celts reached Spain, known to the ancients as Celtiberians, fierce fighters who resisted Roman conquest for generations. In the east, they wandered into the Balkans and even into Asia Minor, where a people called the Galatians settled near what is now Turkey. Though diverse, these Celtic peoples shared bonds of language, art, and belief. They were a web of tribes across Europe, united not by empire, but by spirit. Part 5. The Coming of Rome, Conquest and Resistance. Rome saw the Celts first as enemies, then as obstacles, and finally as subjects. After the burning of Rome by Celtic raiders, the memory of humiliation haunted the Republic. Centuries later, Julius Caesar sought both vengeance and glory. In his Gallic Wars, Caesar led legions against the tribes of Gaul. He described their bravery, their chieftains, their druids, and their fierce resistance. Yet Rome's discipline and strategy wore them down. The greatest of their leaders was Vercingetorix of the Arverni. Charismatic and proud, he united tribes against Rome, defying Caesar's might. At the Battle of Alesia in 52 BCE, he fought with all his strength, but the Roman legions built walls within walls, encircling both the Celts and those who came to aid them. Starved and surrounded, Vercingetorix surrendered. Bound in chains, he was paraded in Rome before being executed, a symbol of Celtic defiance, broken but unforgettable. In Britain, resistance lasted longer. Queens like Boudica of the Iceni rose against Rome, burning towns and terrifying legions. But one by one, the tribes fell. Only Ireland and the far highlands of Scotland remain free, where Roman eagles never fully conquered. Part 6. The Legacy of the Celts, from ancient tribes to modern myths. Though Rome subdued their lands, the Celts never vanished. Their traditions endured in hidden valleys, in the chants of druids remembered, in stories whispered by poets. In Ireland and Wales, monks recorded the old sagas, preserving myths of Cuchulainn, of Fionn and his warriors, of gods who once ruled the earth. These tales became the backbone of medieval legend, flowing into the great cycles of Arthurian romance, where druids became wizards and Celtic heroes merged with knights. In art, the Celts left spirals and knots, endless patterns without beginning or end, carved into stone crosses, illuminated manuscripts, and jewelry that still glimmers today. Their music lingered in pipes and harps, their festivals lived on in Samhain, which became All Hallows' Eve, Halloween. Even now, the Celtic spirit breathes in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Brittany, Galicia, in languages, in music, in stories of fairies and warriors. Though empires rose and fell, the Celts live on. not as conquerors, but as a people of myth, of legend, and of memory. Their druids still walk in stories, their warriors still ride in dreams,
Part 1.
and their
The
spirals
Cradle of
still
Persia,
remind us
land
that
of
history
mountains
is
and
never a
deserts.
straight line,
Far
but a
to the
circle,
east of Mesopotamia,
eternal
beyond the rivers
unbroken.
of Babylon and the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates, there stretched a land of extremes. Persia, a realm of burning deserts, towering mountains, and endless plateaus. To the west lay the Zagros, sharp ridges crowned with snow. To the south, the desert opened into the waters of the Persian Gulf. It was a land both harsh and fertile, where survival demanded strength, and strength gave birth to empires. Nomadic tribes roamed the steppes, farmers tended oases, and caravans traced paths that would one day form the Silk Roads. Here, among fire and stone, the first Persians took shape, heirs of the Indo-Iranian peoples who carried with them ancient gods, chants, and dreams of destiny. Part 2. The Prophet Zoroaster, Fire, Truth, and the Eternal Struggle. In this land of contrasts, a prophet arose. His name was Zarathustra, or Zoroaster. He spoke of a single great God, Ahura Mazda, Lord of Wisdom, who embodied truth, light, and order. Opposing him was Angra Mainyu, the spirit of destruction, who spread lies, chaos, and shadow. The world, Zoroaster taught, was a battleground between these two forces. Men and women were not helpless before fate. They had a choice: to speak truth, to act with righteousness, to care for fire, water, and earth was to stand with light. To lie, to harm, to desecrate the sacred world was to side with darkness. At the heart of this faith burned eternal fire, tended in temples, flames that never died. These sacred fires symbolized the purity of Ahura Mazda, a beacon against shadow. Zoroastrianism was more than religion. It became the soul of Persia. From the king to the farmer, from warriors to priests, all were called to fight in the eternal struggle for order against chaos, light against dark. Part 3. The Achaemenid Rise, Cyrus the Great, and the Birth of Empire. From scattered tribes rose a man destined to shape the world. Cyrus II, known to history as Cyrus the Great. In the mid-6th century BCE, he united the Persian tribes and rose against the Median overlords. With cunning, bravery, and vision, he carved a new power where none had stood before. Cyrus swept across the lands, conquering the Medes, the Lydians, and finally Babylon itself. Yet he was no mere conqueror. Where other rulers crushed their foes, Cyrus showed mercy. He freed the Jews exiled in Babylon, restored temples, respected the gods of every land. He called himself not only King of Persia, but King of Kings, ruler of peoples united under tolerance and law. His legacy was enshrined in what we call the Cyrus Cylinder, often called the world's first declaration of human rights. There, his words promised respect for the traditions and freedoms of his subjects. Cyrus died on campaign, but his vision endured. His descendants inherited not only his empire, but his example, a vision of rule by both strength and justice.
Part 4. Kings of Kings, Darius, Xerxes, and the Persian World. After Cyrus, the empire expanded further under Darius I, a master organizer. He built the arteries of empire, the royal road stretching from Susa to Sardis, where mounted couriers could carry messages in mere days. He minted coins of gold, the darics, that tied trade together from Egypt to India. Darius called himself Shahanshah, King of Kings, and he ruled an empire vast beyond imagining. Its heart was Persepolis, a city of terraces and palaces, with columns rising like forests of stone. Reliefs carved upon its walls showed envoys from every corner of the empire bringing tribute. Ethiopians with ivory, Indians with gold, Scythians with horses. But with greatness came challenge. In the west lay Greece, small, divided city-states, yet proud and defiant. Darius sent his armies across the Aegean, only to be checked at Marathon. His son Xerxes would return with even greater force. Xerxes raised a vast host, said by storytellers to be millions strong. Bridges of boats spanned the Hellespont, fleets shadowed the coast. At Thermopylae, a small band of Spartans and allies held the pass with fearless defiance. Though Xerxes burned Athens, his navy fell at Salamis, and in time the Greeks pushed Persia back. The empire endured, vast and splendid, but the wars with Greece marked a turning point, a challenge that echoed through centuries. Part 5. The Clash of Civilizations, Persia and the Greek World. For the Greeks, the wars were tales of freedom against tyranny. For the Persians, they were but one chapter in an empire that stretched to horizons unseen. Yet the clash shaped both worlds. Persia remained wealthy, diverse, a mosaic of peoples. Egyptians, Babylonians, Indians, Jews, and Greeks themselves, all subjects of the King of Kings. Zoroastrian fire temples burned across the land, while Persian art, gardens, and palaces flourished. But in the West, the Greeks dreamed larger. The victories at Marathon, Salamis, and Plataea gave them pride and myth. The Persian Wars became a story retold for generations, of defiance, of gods favoring the small against the mighty. And in this pride was born ambition. The city-states, though divided, looked east with restless eyes. In time, one man would seize that vision and turn it into destiny. Part 6. The Fall of Persia, Alexander the Great and the End of an Empire. In the 4th century BCE, from the north came a storm. Alexander of Macedon, young, brilliant, and insatiable, set forth to conquer the Persian world. With a small but disciplined army, he crossed into Asia and struck at the heart of empire. At Issus, his phalanx shattered the Persian lines. At Gaugamela, he faced the vast army of Darius III. The plain shook with chariots and cavalry, but Alexander's tactics broke the Persians once more. Darius fled, his empire unraveling before him. At last, Alexander entered Persepolis, the jewel of Persia. For months he ruled in its palaces, until one night, in drunken revelry or deliberate symbol, he set the city ablaze. Flames devoured halls where kings once held court. Columns blackened against the sky. The heart of the empire was ash. Darius died on the run, betrayed by his own men. The Achaemenid dynasty ended, and with it the first great Persian empire. Yet Persia did not vanish. Its culture, its religion, its art endured, shaping the Parthians, the Sassanids, and through them the very world of Islam. Even Alexander, though conqueror, bowed to Persian ways, adopting dress, ceremony, and dreams of empire. Persia was more than its kings. It was an idea, a vision of rule that blended strength with tolerance, earth with fire, humanity with the divine. From Zoroaster's flames to Cyrus's mercy,
From Persepolis' columns to Alexander's conquest, Persia lived as a bridge between worlds, eternal,
Part 1.
luminous,
The Gift of the Nile.
unforgotten.
Origins of Egyptian civilization. Long before stone rose into pyramids and pharaohs wore crowns of gold, there was the river. The Nile, flowing endlessly from the heart of Africa, gave Egypt its life. Each year the waters swelled and spilled across the land, leaving behind a ribbon of black earth amidst the desert. It was this rhythm, the flood, the planting, the harvest, that shaped a civilization. The first Egyptians built villages along its banks, planting barley and wheat, raising cattle and geese. They wove papyrus reeds into boats, then mats, carved clay jars for grain, and watched the river with reverence. To them, the Nile was not only water, but a god, a gift of the divine. In time, tribes and chiefdoms united into kingdoms. Around 3100 BCE, a ruler named Narmer, sometimes called Menes, brought Upper and Lower Egypt together, wearing the double crown of both lands. With this unification, the story of Egypt truly began. Part 2. Gods and Myths. Ra, Osiris, and the Journey to the Afterlife. The Egyptians lived in two worlds, the seen and the unseen. To them, the universe was alive with gods. There was Ra, the sun god, sailing his golden bark across the sky by day, battling serpents of darkness by night. Osiris, the lord of the dead, who had been slain by his brother Set and restored by the love of his wife Isis, ruled over the afterlife. Horus, the falcon, avenged his father Osiris, and every pharaoh was seen as his earthly incarnation. Anubis, with the head of a jackal, guided souls through the halls of death. The afterlife was not a place of shadows, but a continuation of life, a field of reeds where the dead would live forever, provided their hearts were pure. At judgment, the heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, goddess of truth. A heart heavy with sin was devoured by a monster. A heart light as truth was welcomed into eternity. Priests recited spells, families prepared offerings, and scribes copied the Book of the Dead onto papyrus to guide the departed through the perils of the underworld. Death was not an end, but a passage, one that every Egyptian prepared for all their life. Part 3. The Age of the Pyramids. Pharaohs of the Old Kingdom. In the days of the Old Kingdom, pharaohs built monuments that reached toward the heavens. The earliest was Djoser's Step Pyramid, designed by his architect Imhotep. The first pyramid, a stairway for the king's soul to climb into the sky. Later pharaohs of the Fourth Dynasty dreamed larger. At Giza, Khufu raised the Great Pyramid, its stones stacked with astonishing precision, towering higher than any building for thousands of years. Nearby, his successors, Khafre and Menkaure, built their own pyramids, guarded by the enigmatic Sphinx, gazing across the desert. These were not only tombs, they were symbols of divine kingship, of the pharaoh as a god on earth, bridging heaven and earth. Inside, hidden chambers, golden treasures, and spells carved into stone prepared the king for his eternal journey. The laborers who built them were not slaves, but skilled workers, farmers who toiled during the flood season when fields lay under water. They left behind graffiti, jokes, and prayers carved into the stones, a human voice echoing across millennia. Part 4. Empire and glory, pharaohs of the new kingdom. Centuries passed, dynasties rose and fell, and Egypt entered a new golden age, the new kingdom. Its pharaohs were conquerors, priests, and builders of monuments beyond imagining. Hatshepsut, the queen who became king, sent ships across the Red Sea to the land of Punt, bringing back incense, gold, and myrrh. She raised great temples, declaring herself chosen by the gods. Thutmose III, the warrior pharaoh, led armies into Syria and Nubia, extending Egypt's power far beyond its borders. Amenhotep III filled Thebes with splendor, his colossal statues still standing in the fields today. Then came Ramesses II, the Great. He fought the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh, carved his name into temples across the land, and raised the mighty Abu Simbel, its colossal statues guarding the southern frontier. In the temples of Karnak and Luxor, priests honored Amun-Ra, lord of the gods. Vast columns, towering obelisks, and sacred lakes reflected the glory of the divine. Egypt was the richest land of its age, its gold coveted, its kings remembered as gods. Part 5. Akhenaten and the Revolution of the Sun. Yet even in Egypt, change came. In the 14th century BCE, a pharaoh named Akhenaten turned away from the old gods. He declared that only Aten, the sun disk, was true. He closed temples, defied the powerful priesthood, and built a new capital at Amarna. His queen, the radiant Nefertiti, stood beside him, her image immortalized in sculpture that still captivates the world. Art changed, figures shown in intimacy, with children, with soft curves instead of rigid forms. It was a time unlike any before. But the people did not accept this revolution. After Akhenaten's death, the boy king Tutankhamun restored the old gods. Though Tutankhamun ruled only briefly, his tomb, sealed and hidden, would one day reveal treasures beyond imagination, untouched for over 3,000 years. Akhenaten's vision faded, but his story endures, a reminder of how even the most eternal traditions could be shaken by a single king. Part 6. The Twilight of the Pharaohs, Decline and Legacy. In the centuries that followed, Egypt's power waned. Foreign invaders came, Libyans, Assyrians, Persians, each leaving their mark upon the Nile. Then, in 332 BCE, Alexander the Great marched into Egypt. To the people, he was not a conqueror, but a liberator from Persian rule. They crowned him pharaoh, son of Amun, and he founded Alexandria, a city of learning and trade that would shine for centuries. After Alexander's death, his general Ptolemy took Egypt, beginning the dynasty of the Ptolemies. Greek and Egyptian traditions blended. The most famous of all was Cleopatra VII, who sought to preserve Egypt's independence, allying with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. But Rome's might was too great. In 30 BCE, after her death, Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. Though the pharaohs were gone, Egypt's legacy never faded. Its monuments still tower above the sands. Its gods and myths lived on in new forms. Its art inspired ages. Its wisdom preserved in scrolls. From the Nile's first villages to the last queen, Egypt remains eternal. A land where the living and the dead, the mortal and the divine,
Part 1.
walked side
From
by
the
side
Franks to
beneath
the
the
Crusade.
endless sun.
Chapter 1. The Franks and the Birth of France. As the Western Roman Empire crumbled in the 5th century, new tribes filled the vacuum of power. Among them were the Franks, a Germanic people who settled in Gaul. Their leader, Clovis I,
rose to unite them. In 496, after victory in battle, he was baptized into Christianity, becoming the first Catholic king of the Franks. With him, a bond was forged between kingship and the church that would shape France for centuries. Under Clovis and his descendants, the Merovingian dynasty ruled. Their kings wore long hair as a sign of power, but over time, real authority slipped into the hands of their nobles and palace mayors. Yet the name of the Franks gave birth to France, and their kingdom laid its first foundations. Chapter 2. Charlemagne and the Carolingian Empire. In the 8th century, a new dynasty rose, the Carolingians. Its greatest ruler was Charlemagne, or Charles the Great. He expanded the Frankish realm into an empire stretching from Spain to Germany, from the North Sea to Italy. On Christmas Day, in the year 800, in the Basilica of St. Peter's in Rome, Pope Leo III placed a crown upon his head, declaring him Emperor of the Romans. The legacy of Rome lived again in the West. Charlemagne was not only a conqueror, but a reformer. He established schools, reformed laws, and promoted learning in what came to be called the Carolingian Renaissance. Scholars copied ancient texts, monks illuminated manuscripts, and Latin was preserved. His empire did not survive long after his death in 814, but his memory endured. To the French, he was both king and father of their nation, the shining figure at the dawn of their story. Chapter 4. Feudal France and the Age of Castles. With Charlemagne's empire divided, France entered a new age, the age of feudalism. Kings were weak, and local lords ruled their lands like little monarchs. Castles of stone rose on every hill, symbols of power and defense. Knights swore loyalty to their lords, bound by oaths of fealty. Peasants worked the fields, paying rents in labor and crops. Monasteries grew in importance, centers of prayer, learning, and refuge. It was a world of division and loyalty, of swords and towers. Though often violent, it forged the medieval order, where power was local and every village lived in the shadow of a castle or a monastery. Chapter 5. The Capetian Kings and the Growth of Paris. In 987, a nobleman named Hugh Capet was elected king. His crown was small, his realm weak, but he founded a dynasty, the Capetians, that would rule France for centuries. At first, the Capetian kings controlled little more than Paris and its surrounding lands, yet Paris itself began to grow. It became a center of trade along the Seine, and its cathedral, Notre Dame, rose as a symbol of faith and pride. Generation by generation, the Capetians slowly expanded their authority. By patience, marriage, and war, they bound the great lords of France to their throne. The seeds of a true kingdom were being sown. Chapter 5. The Crusades and the French Knights. In the late 11th century, a call went out from Rome. The First Crusade. Across Europe, knights gathered to march to the Holy Land. Among them, the French were the most numerous and the most renowned. They marched beneath the cross, their banners flying. They captured Jerusalem in 1099 and founded Crusader states in the east. French knights became lords of castles in Syria and Palestine, blending east and west. Back home, the crusading spirit shaped France. Orders like the Knights Templar were born, their headquarters in Paris, their power stretching across Europe. Songs of crusaders and pilgrims filled the air, binding faith and war in the French imagination. The age of the Crusades made France the beating heart of Christendom, a land of knights, kings, and dreams of holy conquest.
Part 2.
From the 100 Years' War to the Sun King. Chapter 6. The 100 Years' War. In the 14th century, France faced its greatest trial. A long conflict with England began, the 100 Years' War. It was not a single war, but a century of battles, truces, and shifting fortunes. At first, France suffered. At Crécy and Agincourt, English longbowmen cut down French knights in fields of mud and blood. Kings were captured, cities lost, and despair spread across the land. But hope came in the form of a peasant girl, Joan of Arc. Claiming visions from God, she led French armies to victories, lifting the siege of Orléans and restoring faith in the crown. Captured and burned by the English, she became a martyr and later a saint. By the mid-15th century, France emerged victorious. The English were driven out, and the French crown was stronger than ever before. Chapter 7. The Renaissance in France. With peace came renewal. The French kings embraced the spirit of the Renaissance, which had begun in Italy. Palaces replaced castles, gardens bloomed with fountains, and art flourished. King François I invited artists like Leonardo da Vinci to his court. The chateau of the Loire Valley rose in elegance, blending Gothic and Renaissance styles. Literature thrived with poets and thinkers who brought new ideas of humanism and beauty. Paris became not only a political capital, but a cultural one, where scholars debated and artists dreamed. But harmony was fragile. In the 16th century, France was torn apart by religious wars. Protestants, called Huguenots, clashed with Catholics in streets and fields. The violence reached horror in 1572 during the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, when thousands of Huguenots were slain in Paris and across the land. At last, a new king rose, Henri IV, first of the Bourbon dynasty. Once a Protestant himself, he converted to Catholicism, declaring Paris is worth a mass. He issued the Edict of Nantes, granting tolerance to Protestants, and restored peace. France, though scarred, found stability once more. Chapter 9. The Age of Louis XIV, the Sun King. In the 17th century, France reached its zenith under Louis XIV, the Sun King. He declared "L'État, c'est moi," which meant "I am the state." His reign embodied absolute monarchy. He built the magnificent Palace of Versailles, where gilded halls and endless gardens proclaimed royal power. Nobles were drawn to his court, dazzled and controlled by ceremony and splendor. Under Louis, France became the most powerful nation in Europe. Its armies won wars. Its culture set the standard of elegance. Writers like Molière and Racine, artists and musicians flourished under royal patronage. Yet his wars drained the treasury, and his grandeur carried heavy costs. Still, Louis XIV left France transformed,
Part 1.
the very
The
image
land
of royal
Hellas,
power and glory.
mountains, seas, and early settlements. Greece, or Hellas as its people called it, was a land of mountains and islands. Jagged peaks divided valleys into small pockets where villages clung to the soil and grew into independent city-states. The Aegean Sea stretched like a silver mirror, dotted with islands, inviting sailors to journey outward. Here, geography shaped destiny. The Greeks were never one people under one king, but many, bound by language, gods, and stories. Farmers tended olives and vines on rocky hillsides. Shepherds led flocks through narrow passes, and fishermen cast nets into the deep. From their harbors, Greeks sailed to Egypt, Anatolia, and beyond, carrying wine, pottery, and ideas. It was a land both harsh and beautiful, a place that demanded resilience and inspired imagination. Part 2. The Age of Myths, Zeus, Hera, and the Olympian Gods. Before history, the Greeks told stories. They spoke of Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky. They told how the Titans rose and how Cronus devoured his children, only to be overthrown by his son Zeus. Upon Mount Olympus, the gods reigned. Zeus, king of thunder; Hera, his queen; Athena, born from his head in armor; Apollo, radiant with the light of prophecy and music; Artemis, huntress of the wild; Poseidon, lord of the sea; Hades, ruler of the underworld. The gods were not distant. They quarreled, loved, deceived, and punished, reflecting the passions of men. In every storm, every harvest, every victory, the Greeks saw their will. To honor them, they built temples, offered sacrifices, and held festivals of music, games, and ritual. Myth was not just story, it was truth woven into daily life. Part 3. Heroes and Epics, Homer, the Iliad, and the Odyssey. From these myths came heroes larger than life, yet deeply human. Their tales were sung by bards and at last written by Homer, whose epics shaped Greece forever. The Iliad told of the Trojan War, of Achilles, swift and wrathful, of Hector, noble defender, of Helen, whose beauty launched 1,000 ships. It spoke of fate and rage, of gods meddling in the affairs of men. The Odyssey told of Odysseus, who wandered for years across strange seas, facing Cyclops, sirens, and enchantresses before returning home to Ithaca. His journey was not only across waters, but through the trials of the human soul. These epics were not just entertainment. They were guides to virtue and folly, courage and pride, the lessons of men and gods sung beneath the stars. Part 4. The Age of Heroes, Heracles, Perseus, and Theseus. Beyond Homer's epics, countless heroes lived in Greek memory. There was Heracles, son of Zeus, who bore the labors of strength, slaying the Nemean lion, capturing the golden hind, cleaning the Augean stables, and many more. His trials symbolized endurance against impossible odds. There was Perseus, who cut off the head of Medusa, the Gorgon with serpents for hair, whose gaze turned men to stone. There was Theseus, who entered the labyrinth of Crete, facing the Minotaur, half man, half bull, and slew it, guided by the thread of Ariadne. These heroes were not flawless. They erred, they suffered. But in them the Greeks saw courage, cunning, and destiny. Their stories lived in temples, in plays, in whispered prayers of those who sought strength. Part 5. The Rise of the Polis, Athens and Sparta, and the Greek way of life. As centuries passed, Greece left behind the age of myths and entered the age of cities. The polis, the city-state, became the heart of Greek life. In Athens, democracy was born. Citizens gathered in assembly to vote, to debate, to decide laws together. They celebrated theater, philosophy, and the arts, building a society that valued speech as much as spear. In Sparta, a different way of life prevailed. Boys were trained as warriors from youth, living in barracks, bound by discipline and strength. Their women held unusual freedom, managing estates and speaking boldly, while their men fought for the state above all else. Other cities flourished too, Corinth with trade, Thebes with warriors. But Athens and Sparta shone brightest, 2 stars guiding Greece in different directions. The Greeks were rivals, but also kin. They met in festivals like the Olympic Games, held every 4 years in honor of Zeus, where athletes ran, wrestled, and competed beneath the gaze of the gods. Part 6. War with Persia, Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis. Beyond their mountains and seas lay empires vast and powerful, none greater than Persia. In the 5th century BCE, Persia sought to subdue the small cities of Greece, but the Greeks resisted. At Marathon, outnumbered, Athenians charged the Persians and won a stunning victory. A messenger ran back to Athens to deliver the news, the origin of the Marathon race. Years later, at Thermopylae, King Leonidas of Sparta stood with 300 warriors against a host beyond counting. Though they fell, their defiance inspired Greece. At sea, the Athenians triumphed at Salamis, luring the Persian fleet into narrow straits and crushing them. United, the Greeks turned back the might of an empire, proving that courage and cunning could overcome vast power. These wars shaped Greek identity, free cities standing against tyranny, united by gods, heroes, and the love of their land.
Part 7. Athens and the Golden Age, Pericles, Drama, and Philosophy. After the Persian Wars, Athens entered its greatest age. Under the statesman Pericles, democracy flourished, and the city adorned itself with temples and theaters. Upon the Acropolis, the Parthenon rose, its marble columns gleaming in the sun, a tribute to Athena, goddess of wisdom. Athenians loved the arts. Playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides filled theaters with tragedies and dramas that asked timeless questions of fate and justice. Aristophanes, with sharp comedy, mocked generals and politicians alike. Philosophers walked the streets, debating truth, virtue, and the soul. Sculptors carved statues of divine beauty, while citizens gathered to listen, to argue, to vote. Athens became the shining jewel of Greece, a beacon of culture and ideas, though its brilliance would also sow envy and strife. Part 8. Sparta and the Peloponnesian War. Sparta, proud and wary, looked upon Athens' growing power with suspicion. So began the Peloponnesian War, a struggle that pitted Greek against Greek. For nearly 30 decades, Athens and Sparta fought, at sea, on land, in sieges and shifting alliances. Athens' navy ruled the waves, while Spartans' warriors dominated the fields. The war drained resources, shattered unity, and brought plague and famine. At last, with the help of Persia, Sparta triumphed. Athens surrendered, its walls torn down, its empire lost. Yet Sparta, too, soon weakened, and Greece lay divided, vulnerable to new powers rising beyond its borders. Part 9. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Wisdom of the Greeks. Even in times of war, Greek thought soared. In Athens, the philosopher Socrates wandered the streets, questioning merchants and generals, asking, "What is justice? What is virtue?" His method of relentless inquiry unsettled many, and at last he was condemned, drinking poison in defense of truth. His student Plato founded the Academy, envisioning a republic guided by wisdom and the ideal of forms. Aristotle, in turn, studied all things, logic, biology, ethics, politics, and taught a young Macedonian prince who would one day change the world.
These thinkers left Greece not only with monuments of stone, but monuments of the mind, ideas that still shape our world. Part 10. The Rise of Macedonia. Philip II unites the Greeks. In the north, a new power gathered strength, Macedonia. Once dismissed as rustic and crude, under Philip II it forged a formidable army. With long spears called sarissas, disciplined ranks, and clever strategy, Philip crushed the divided Greek states. At the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE, Athens and Thebes fell before him. For the first time, Greece stood united, though not by choice, under Macedonian rule. Philip dreamed of leading the Greeks against Persia, but before his vision could unfold, he was struck down by an assassin. His son would inherit his dream. Part 11. Alexander the Great. Conquests to the Edge of the World. That son was Alexander, who became king at 20. Taught by Aristotle, trained in war from youth, Alexander was bold, brilliant, and relentless. He crossed into Asia, leading Greeks against Persia. At Granicus, Issus, and Gaugamela, he shattered the Persian armies and pursued Darius III across his empire. From Asia Minor to Egypt, from Babylon to the mountains of India, Alexander marched, his soldiers following him into lands unknown. He founded cities named Alexandria, spreading Greek culture across the world. Yet he also honored local traditions, wearing Persian robes, adopting Eastern customs, and blending cultures. But at 32, in Babylon, Alexander fell ill and died. His empire, vast as the horizon, fractured among his generals. Yet his legend never faded, the boy who became a god in the eyes of many. Part 12. The Legacy of Greece. Philosophy, Democracy, and Myth Eternal. Though empires passed, Greece left behind treasures greater than conquest. Democracy, born in Athens, became an ideal for ages to come. Philosophy, from Socrates to Aristotle, laid the foundations of reason and science. The myths of Zeus, Athena, and Achilles still speak to the human heart. Greek art, drama, and architecture inspired Rome, the Renaissance, and the modern world. Their stories, carved in marble and sung in verse, remain eternal. Greece was not one empire, but a spirit of inquiry, of freedom, of beauty.